I did a story on what we then called winos in 1980. There were probably 900 of them, and there were like these single room occupancy hotels that were cheap flop houses where they
Mm.
stayed. There were no homeless. The word homeless did not appear in my story. By 1982, there was a recession, and there were several hundred what we now call homeless people in Sacramento along the rivers. Uh, I went back during the pandemic to do a research for another book. There
Mm.
were up to 9,000 of them.
Mm.
Uh, Exponential increase in numbers. A student of mine last year was shocked. She didn't believe me when I said there haven't always been homeless. She just assumed at 22, 23 years old
Yeah.
that homeless has always existed. We
Yeah.
allowed it to happen. That's just one of many doom loops that we've started in the 80s.
Okay. So, hey, Dale, where are you again? Are you in New York? No,
I'm in Los Angeles
you're in
now.
LA. That's right. I get all confused because of the whole Columbia thing, but you live in LA?
I right now I'm bi-coastal for the next year or so.
So where do you live when you're in New York? I'm not calling for an address. I'm just curious. Are you
Upper West Side. I look at my window and I can see the campus.
So I know where you are. What are you on, like 102nd Street
Oh,
and Broadway?
115th and Broadway.
Oh, cool. So you just go up to West Side and that's nice. How
Where are
long
you
did
where are you
how long did
located?
you live? I live just north of Boston, about 45 minutes out of town. How long were you on the Upper West Side? Is that where you've kind of had a place for decades?
Yeah, I've been there. I've been back at Columbia for 25 years total, if you add it
So I
all
have
up.
a question for you. I think it was like at about 110th and Broadway, there was a sushi joint I always went to called Tomo.
Oh, I love Tomo. Yes.
They shut.
Yeah,
Why did Tomo close? My wife and I still talk about it.
I don't, restaurants in New York, it's the hardest damn business.
But they were always full.
Oh, I know.
You went in and sat at the counter. The prices were right. You got your edamame, you got your sushi or sashimi, and they were great. And it was nice and low key. And it was always full of students and professors and people. And you thought, oh, well, they'll be here forever.
Yep. Well, there's a new sushi place there, not there, but near there now. But yeah, it's a weird time. And the pandemic, of course, really whacked a lot of
Yeah.
restaurants.
Yeah, they closed. And the other one I liked, I think it was down at about 80th Street, was the Saigon Grill. And then they got caught up in some big scandal where the owners were stealing the tips or something. And then a bunch of lawyers got involved. And these three Vietnamese restaurants shut. And I was crushed because I liked Saigon Grill too. So it was just,
No, it's if you like something in New York, it won't be there in 10 years. That's pretty much about the rule I've learned.
yeah. Yeah, it was funny because we would go to these places. And of course, I grew up in Switzerland. The great restaurants and hotels or whatever, maybe they upgrade the trains or something. But Jeannie and I went back last summer to visit my family, and the Hotel du Raisin in Cuy, which was one of our favorite places where we always got filet de perche caught from the lake. 20 years later, you walk in, you even see some of the same staff, because a wait job in Switzerland is not a step to being an actor. It's like a profession, and you're paid and you have benefits.
Yep. Yeah,
So
Los Angeles is especially full of the former.
yeah. So what part of LA do you stay in when you're out there? What part of town are you in?
I got a place up in the Santa Monica Mountains, up in the canyons.
Okay.
It's the opposite of Manhattan. I'm
Yeah,
in
I
the
know.
woods.
I have a friend who lives in Santa Monica proper, and I often stay with him over the years I did when I went out there. So I know that neck of the woods. I don't, or how do you get to where you go?
Oh, you go up. It's oh my gosh, it's between the beach and the 101. It's you go up the 101 past Topanga Canyon Boulevard to Malibu Canyon Road, and then you go in there.
When you're driving that way, do you go up towards Zuma,
Oh,
the beach?
Zuma's north of me. Yeah,
So that's north of you? Because I used
yeah.
to go walk on that beach. And at the end of Zuma, there's that rocky wall. People climb on it.
Oh,
And it's
yes.
because every time they do a location in any movie or any commercial ever, where they want a piece of beach and then something to define it, a rock or something. I don't care if it's supposed to be set in Italy. It's like, I know where that is.
I lived in Boston for a year, so I know that part of the world a little tiny bit.
Yeah. So did you ever get here for academic reasons when you were teaching at Columbia?
No, I was there before. I was a journalist. Well, still a journalist. I was at a Neiman Fellowship at Harvard for a year. Uh,
Yeah.
God, that was intellectual Disneyland.
Yeah. So flying between LA and New York, are you sick of the back and forth, or is it just like par for the course, or do you get depressed?
I'm really tired of being bicoastal. I've been bicoastal for years. I had a deal at Columbia for years where I was full time but half time appointment, and then I went full time about 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, I if I never had to fly again, I'd be happy.
me too. And back in the day, I'm old enough, and I think you are too. I remember, when you could just walk onto an airplane before they did the security thing. And I remember when if you missed a flight, they'd book you on another flight with the same ticket.
Yep.
And everything worked. And it's really interesting to me that I'm 72 and I started going to boarding school in the United Kingdom from Switzerland when I was 10. And I would fly alone because everything worked well and take a cab to Victoria Station and then take the train. And you just, your parents and other people would assume this is all going to work. And it wasn't unpleasant. And economy was like, business class size seats, not with the couch and all that crap they get. But, and
got
now
food.
it's just like hell on earth.
Yeah, you got a meal in
Got a
economy.
meal. And if it was halfway decent, and if you got stuck, they did something about it. They rebooked you and they didn't board planes like, I don't know what's happened, but
Well, there's 16 classes, and the tickets I can afford are like class 13,
yeah, exactly right. Last group.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyways.
What? The losers.
Yeah, the loser group. It's, the gold thing, the diamond group, the thing, the scarred, the thing, and then finally it's group 13 and 14, and then there's the losers, and then there's the guys that just have to run behind the airplane and hope to catch something.
It's just like the American economy has gotten.
Yeah, I basically I enjoy where I'm going, but the airline, I'd give the airline a miss. Anyway, I should introduce you and get this going.
All right.
My name is Frank Schaeffer, and this is a podcast called In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And my guest today is Pulitzer Prize-winning author Dale Maharidge. Tell me your name. So let me hear it right. Maharidge?
Dale Maharidge.
Maharidge, yes. Ernie, my producer, has vainly tried to do it. So Dale Maharidge. And Dale is a professor at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism and author of Pulitzer Prize-winning And Their Children After Them, and 14 other books. And among them is one called Journey to Nowhere, the Saga of the New Underclass, which inspired Bruce Springsteen to write the song Youngstown. His new book is called American Doom Loop, and I've just finished reading it. And I would ask you to please subscribe to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer on Apple Podcasts and to my Substack, It Has to Be Said, at frankschaeffer.substack.com. And other than that, I just want to welcome Dale here and say, really, it's a pleasure to have you. And I've read your book with great interest because I'm old enough to have lived through everything you're talking about. So, not only do I get the book and love the writing and think you're a wonderful writer and very descriptive, but having actually experienced some of the things because I'm in the age bracket where shit because of, how old I am. So I want to read something to you from Doom Loop and just get us going. Here's a quote from the book I like. Let me just see. Do I have a page number? No, it is wherever I picked it off the page and put it on my notes from. I write of a time that seems idyllic in comparison to the present day, a time when it was easier to obtain certain books than guns in some states, a time when abortion was legal everywhere in the United States, a time when the word, quote, homeless infrequently appeared in print. I write of the 1980s, a pivotal decade that was the start of a doom loop which is a cycle of negative events that feed off each other, making things progressively worse. I just love that paragraph, so I'm letting it roll off my tongue here. What a brilliant piece of writing, and also just how true. And a minute ago, we were casually talking before we got serious about airline travel. And there's lots of little footnotes to the doom loop. That would be one of them, a kind of a degradation. Who said this the other day? I heard a good phrase. They called it the shitification of American life. And you just think of the fact that, Amazon, that I subscribe to and would be a wonderful client forever, now wants me to pay more to watch movies that were part of the package that lured me into that, because now I could get all my movies there. But if I don't want them with commercials, they've added something onto it. And everywhere you look, there's little signs of the doom loop and big ones. So let's just start by asking you, as a journalist who's been around the block, written on everything under the sun, lived a big life, how would you define the doom loop in a larger sense than just airline travel and Amazon always sticking you with another charge?
Well, I like to look at the homeless. I did a story on what we then called winos in 1980. You wouldn't use that term today, but then it was acceptable. These were men public inebriates in Sacramento, California, who drank near the river. There were probably 900 of them, and there were like these single room occupancy hotels that were cheap flop houses where they stayed. 20 or 30 or 48 guys slept out at what they called the weeds. I went and walked through the woods along the rivers in Sacramento looking for them. There were no homeless. The word homeless did not appear in my story. By 1982, there was a recession, and there were several hundred what we now call homeless people in Sacramento along the rivers. Uh, I went back during the pandemic to do a research for another book. There were up to 9,000 of them, exponential increase in numbers. And it didn't exist. A student of mine last year was shocked. She didn't believe me when I said there haven't always been homeless. She just assumed at 22, 23 years old that homeless has always existed. We allowed it to happen. That's just one of many doom loops that we've started in the 80s.
Yeah, here's another quote. Fast forward to 2023 in Doom Loop America, conservatives have increased calls to kill the decades-old federal housing first approach to fighting homelessness. And you go on and say the program is limited in how much it can accomplish. But as its name implies, housing is what those without homes need. It does good work. Republicans backed by conservative think tanks, and by the way, this isn't in your book, but just adding that those same think tanks are now hard at work laying out a plan for how they will use Trump's second term to do more of this shit. End of parentheses, my words, not yours. Got behind a bill introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives in early 2023 that would mandate treatment for mental illness and drug use before anyone could receive help through the program, and so forth. So kind of fast forward not only into that part of your book, but just into, okay, the homelessness wasn't apparent as it is now. Then you have your 23-year-old student who is shocked that this isn't always how it's been. So on the political front, in terms of decision makers and public opinion, what has changed since, say, 1979 or 1980 and right now?
Well, it's twofold. At first, I blame Republicans, and I still do, for doing a lot of things not to help working class people. But a big factor was NIMBYs, boomers, our generation.
Yeah.
They don't want housing, affordable housing near them. Now, affordable housing where I live in LA is $800,000 a unit. That's not exactly a shack.
Right.
But over and over, housing initiatives are shot down. I just read in the newspaper yesterday in Sacramento, they want to build a high-rise unit along the river, American River in Sacramento, affordable housing. The NIMBYs are going after it.
Yeah.
So we have a housing shortage. And the conservatives will say, oh, it's because they're all using drugs, that's why they're homeless.
Yeah.
And you go to states where there's affordable housing, like West Virginia and Mississippi, there's far less homeless than there are. It's in New York City. And so that argument goes down this sewer. But we have to build housing. Uh, and I don't want to sound like a real estate developer, but when you zone out affordable housing, the
Sure.
result is going to be homeless, which what we have now. So it's right now the blame goes all over the map.
Yeah.
Republicans and so-called liberal Democrats. I'm an old school liberal Democrat from the 1930s. Uh,
Yeah.
it's a whole different creature today.
Yeah. Yeah, when you step back a minute, I mean, I want to pick your brains on some things. So I'm sorry, I'm going to stray away from your book sometimes because I just want your wisdom, if I can put it that way. Um, and by the way, I really like your writing. You know, Doom Loop is such a good read. I mean, it's a page turner. I would advocate anybody. When was it published, by the way? I'm always hazy on that.
When you write a book, it's hard to say the exact date because I've been working on it for so long.
I know.
About 2 months ago, when officially it came out.
Okay, I know it's weird. Somebody asked me about something I'm writing right now, saying when would it be out? And I said, well, maybe in a year if I'm lucky. You know, I'm sending it to my people don't get it. They expect, and it's the opposite of instant gratification. It takes years to do, and then by the time it actually gets published, you've kind of, the soup is very cold on the table. This is, you don't eat it fresh anyway. So it's out, and I would advocate people to read Doom Loop for good writing, good journalism, a good slice of life, a good analysis of American life. So to just step back from the book a minute, what do you think about the ideological think tanks like Heritage Foundation that right now are putting together a best of all worlds plan to manipulate a second Trump term in terms of accelerating the doom loop you talk about? Because I think this is a real thing. In other words, we've never had a shadow government waiting in the wings of unelected people who are ready to gut the US government, place their own amateurs in power under a sycophant president who does whatever they say because all he cares about is himself. He has no program other than what they whisper to him. It's a unique situation. And I would really like to pick your brains as someone who's been around and understands this country to try to figure out what is so different about this moment. Because I've been around politics and I used to be on the religious right back in the 70s. I've seen both sides. And even back in, quote, our day when we were trying to take over the world for Jesus, there was nothing like this. We were outsiders who would occasionally get a meeting with a powerful person, and we thought that was so great because they actually spoke to us. These guys are all insiders now, and the crap they're coming up with really will happen.
Oh my gosh. Uh, the soup for now is rooted in anger and rage. And you mentioned when you started the show about the song Youngstown. Bruce Springsteen wrote that song. Don't read my first book or just listen to his song. It's
Yeah,
all there. The
yeah,
rage. Yeah, there were 50 to 60,000 high-paid steelworking jobs in Youngstown. And there
yeah.
was a conscious decision by policymakers to abandon industrial. We were going to
Mm,
be global. We NAFTA was going to come and make free trade even easier. And it screwed people on both sides of the border. Well, in
yeah,
Youngstown, those 50 or 60,000 jobs are gone.
yeah,
Um, Bruce sings in his song at one point, I don't want no part of heaven. Uh, uh, I would not do heaven's work well. I rather stand in the fiery furnaces of hell.
mm,
Uh, so what I saw in Youngstown happen from 1980 till now is it went from Democrat to Trump Republican. And these were there's two men in the book. They're both passed now, unfortunately. The father and son who worked in one of the big mills. It's the subject of Bruce's song, actually. Um,
yeah.
and the son became a Trumper before he died.
Mm,
And people wanted to burn it down. Now, my East Coast friends, liberal friends,
mm,
didn't believe me when I went to Youngstown in 2016 doing reporting before the election. uh, a lot of those people would have voted for Bernie. They were
mhm.
just raging. They wanted to blow it up.
Yeah,
So what you're seeing now, not all of it, but a lot of it is the anger vote. Uh,
yeah.
uh, I'm going to digress real briefly. I did a book in the 1990s called The Coming White Minority, uh,
Hmm.
about California becoming a white minority state.
Yeah,
And I had a line in there, it's after the Los Angeles riots. Whites don't riot in the street, they riot at the ballot box.
yeah. Good point. Nice line. Hey, I think I screwed up the introduction of your book. I just want to correct it. Um, The book is American Doom Loop, and I think the subtitle, I left something out, Dispatches from a Troubled Nation, 1980s to 2020s. Is that correct?
Yes.
I got it right this time. I would, if I put my glasses on, I could read everything on my screen, or I could look at the bigger screen over here and not be looking in the right direction. So, I choose to look cooler and screw things up, which is bad. I should just look over here, and it would be like, oh, I'm looking outside and getting inspiration. Anyways, let me get back to this issue of the politics of the moment and the doom loop and the think tanks and all the rest of it. First of all, a little side note. Talk a little more about the Springsteen connection. I think that's so interesting. How did that all happen?
Well, I didn't plan for it, that's for sure. The book came out in 1985. It was called Journey to Nowhere. I can argue it's the first book on the homeless in modern times.
Yeah.
I haven't found another one who came out earlier than us. A bunch have come out since, obviously. 10 years go by. It had its little life. It didn't sell that much. It's not always good to be first with story.
Yes, I know that.
You get arrows. Pioneers get arrows in the back.
Yeah, exactly.
So I get a call from somebody who says, Bruce wants to meet you. I was teaching at Stanford then. I'd left newspapers.
Yeah.
And Michael Williamson, my collaborator, the photographer who wrote all the pictures, happened to be on the West Coast. So we met Bruce backstage at the bridge benefit.
Very cool.
It was amazing. And I said, "How'd you hear how the blank did you hear about our book?"
Yeah.
And he says, "I bought it when it came out." Bruce went into a bookstore in 1985, bought it, put it on his shelf. Then he reread it and wrote two songs, "New Timer" and the song "Youngstown."
Cool.
And yeah, it was. I've been told that's better than the Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah, and speaking of which, since we're doing our your famous and name dropping bit here, the Springsteen connection is the coolest. But tell us a little more about the Pulitzer experience, what you won it for, when that happened, and how that changed anything or didn't.
Well, the second book that I did with Michael was called And the Children After Them. We went to Alabama and traced the fate of sharecroppers in a very famous book called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men by James H.E. and Walker Evans. 50 years later, we go back, and it was a look at poverty a half a century later. What did poverty meant sitting behind a mule in 1936, planting cotton. And what happened to those people? And like all of my work from the beginning and since has been about working class people, and it's really about big money and workers. And big money runs everything. And that's the other thing we're seeing. Trump gets back in. The big money, well, especially the tech bros in Silicon Valley, they're excited about it because it basically the greedification of America just has been continuing since the 80s. That's so all my work has been focused on that, and these sharecroppers were a prism in looking at poverty from the Great Depression to today. And I updated the book again a few years ago and brought it forward. So I like to track arcs. I like to show. I tell my students, life is not as a journalist, is not a snapshot. It's a moving picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I say something very similar, by the way, when people ask me, what do you believe now? As if somehow, you've come to a conclusion. And I say, well, whatever I tell you in the next 10 seconds is today. And call back tomorrow and check it out. That's the problem with writing nonfiction books about your journey away from, say, fundamentalism, because everybody thinks that's where you're at. But of course, it keeps changing. Let me go to a point here that intrigues me about you personally, if you don't mind. And that is, you've got this very, very great empathetic kind of interest in, I won't say the poor, but people who are being stamped on in every generation increasingly, as opposed to, say, the tech bros who resent the government because it has any programs that might impinge on their ability to do what they want. They think they're the brightest, most important people on earth. And so how dare you regulate, whether it's Starlink or anything else. But where do you come from? If someone asks me what my interests are, they come from the fact that I grew up as a pastor's son, whether it's in reaction to something or you continue, you come from somewhere. And so even the things you walk away from, you're still defined by. That's where you started. So what's your personal journey, just you, Dale, in terms of a human being? who winds up again and again and again addressing these issues with, if I may say so, from my background, kind of a missionary zeal to change things by exposing stuff, which I guess is the heart of real journalism. So, to put this bluntly, who are you?
Well, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. My father was a steel worker. My mother was a homemaker for the first couple of years, but then we couldn't make it on my father's salary. She was driving a school bus.
Mm.
So I come from a very working class family. And what motivates my work largely is my father had the what John Steinbeck called the marching phalanx of
Yeah.
forces against him, and he was powerless. I, as a journalist, could have some power and fight for people like my dad. So my
Mm.
dad and my mom, as a school bus driver, it is a missionary zeal. Um,
Sure.
it's been so long. I've not been blue. I still, I was identified as the blue collar writer for years, and
Mm.
I'm so far removed from it.
Sure.
I don't wear that label, but it is, as you say, it does influence you. It's your foundation. It's
Yeah.
the house, the building that you're in is that youth. Uh, and so I still have this strong sense of mission to fight for people like my dad.
Mm. Yeah. And just get a little more drilling down on the personal side. So tell me about your father's personal history and your mom's, and if they've passed away, and what's going on in what happened in their lives after your childhood.
Well, my father was a World War II veteran, Okinawa, the Pacific. I
Yeah.
did a book called Bringing Mulligan Home. He had traumatic brain injury from that war. It was just horrible.
Yeah.
In the end, but there was an era though after that war where you could buy a house, you work hard. I mean, my dad, I think, I just look at the figures for another story. He made about $6,000 in 1967 on
Yeah.
his at a steelworker job, which went farther than that does now, of course, but it was not a lot of money.
Sure.
But you could get a house, your kids could end up like me and my siblings. All of us, succeeded and did well. I really hate the term American dream. It never really existed because it
Yeah.
wasn't universal. As we know, it did not apply to Black people
Yeah.
in the 50s. So it's a phony dream. But there was a sense of a social contract.
Sure.
And that's a thing you talked about a little earlier, what's changed. So social contract has evaporated.
Mm.
Um, we don't even pretend to care about
Mm.
working
Mm.
class people. And that's for sure almost all Republicans now in the Trump party. And a good number of Democrats, not all.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
mixed bag. Democrats, remember, gave us NAFTA. And I talk about a doom loop. So NAFTA happened after the 80s, but in 1996, I recall.
Yeah.
Uh, 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 I think that was right. So all these jobs suddenly went south of the border, but it also affected Mexico. Mexico had to start buying our corporate corn. So several hundred thousand or more Mexican corn farmers were suddenly jobless. Guess what? You have immigration to the United States because of that.
Sure.
So that fueled the right wing even more. So big
Yeah.
money made out, and then it created this other problem. So it affected workers on both sides of the border. It wasn't just American workers who got screwed by
Yeah.
NAFTA.
I don't want to put you on the spot, and we don't know each other well, so I don't know what you're comfortable with, but it seems to me that you would be in a good position to shed some light on something that is of concern to me. And that is that as I watch what happened to the Republican Party being taken over by the religious right and now becoming a Christian nationalist white party, that, by the way, supports Vladimir Putin because he's a white Christian nationalist Russian in league with Archbishop Kirill of Moscow, who is into Christian nationalism as an Orthodox leader, part of the Ukraine war, all the rest of this. Having watched that, I am not like you. I did not grow up in an American working class family, but I grew up in a very engaged political family. And I know from experience that the Republican Party once was an ordinary political party, whether you agreed or disagreed. Now it's not. It's an extraordinary, weird monster. And it started because some very ideologically driven people began to forget what the Republican Party, whether you liked it or not is not the point, was about at one point. And it seems to me, in watching the Democratic Party in the last 10, 15 years in particular, that the Democratic Party used to be the party of working America, and now is the party of white educated university America. And white educated university America is into culture war dynamics before they give a shit about working class, it seems to me. There are no Bruce Springsteens there at all. It's all about culture war stuff and identity politics. You've been in the Democratic working class fold for your life. Please explain to me what's happened in that regard and how you observe that. I could be completely wrong, contradict me, but hasn't there been a change there? And like, is this what the Republican Party has become? Okay, we've given up on that, but are Democrats just about university educated white elites pressing their culture war issues and value signaling to other people by using correct language and terminology? It just seems so far away from a neighbor of mine who's a welder who lives down the street that I talk to because we walk our dogs together. And he looks at all these fancy people, as he calls them, driving by in their BMWs who teach at Harvard, and they're as far from him as you can get. And they're supposed to be Democrats that got Biden stickers on their car. What the hell?
We gave up, Democrats, I say we, old school Democrats collectively gave up our values. As I said earlier, I'm a 1930s model Democrat. It's targeting to the universal. We all need certain things, healthcare, housing. Those issues the Democrats pushed in the 1930s.
Yeah.
The identity politics, it's all about me. The 60s were very much misinterpreted. The 1960s were, I think in popular culture, we were all united and, for a better world. No, the most of the people from the 60s, the radicals or the activists became, yuppies, NIMBY homeowners, very self-centered, very self-absorbed. Then you have this generation now where it's all about identity. And I get into arguments with my friends in New York all the time. I have a colleague who wrote a story for the New York Times about after the pandemic, everyone should have $5,000 cash in their home in case of an emergency. She's one of these elites you talk about.
Sure.
And I write about her in another book. 40% of Americans don't have $200 in the bank to pay a bill. And so they're so out of touch. They think everyone is just like them.
Yeah.
And they don't go to places like Ohio or Michigan and meet people and talk to people. They're not from there. They're not of there. So the coasts, the stratification of the loss of values of a collective society. Really, I take the Republicans to task brutally in American Doom Loop, but I also take these so-called good liberals to task.
Yeah,
they're not living the ideals. They're focused on themselves.
How do you see the future? And I'm not fishing for anything. This is a real question because I don't have the answer, but I just want your wisdom on this. If the Democratic Party represents a white educated elite and the Republicans start representing a misinformed working class that thinks they're on their side, what shakes out for the next 10, 15 years? What happens now? I mean, who are we at that point?
I think I'm a pretty darn good journalist. I do deep dive research. I talk to dozens, hundreds of people for my projects. I'm really bad at predicting the future. Pretty much whatever I say won't happen. That's how I feel. I'm old enough to have predicted things that never happened. So I don't know. I don't know where this lands. That's what's so scary about this moment. We've never been here before.
Yeah, and it's not like the parties are trading places because the Republicans are liars all the way down. They don't represent anybody. When it comes to Trump, he only represents himself. When the Republican Party has a 50-year program that's put Amy Coney Barrett and others on the court, They've been doing this now for 50 years, Heritage and other people, and now all of a sudden they're very close, a heartbeat away from power again. There's a quote from your book. I really like the line here. It kind of feeds out of this. Now it's a time of the psycho du jour, with mass shootings so common that many no longer make national news. 98% of the time, it's a dude with a gun. Details conflate. AR-15s, young, alienated male, loner. 30-shot clip. 100-shot drum, bump stock. The parents knew something was wrong. Screams of children. He was suicidal, hated women, hated Jews, hated gays, and trans people. Did reconnaissance. Attack was live streamed. Motive was unclear. You write so well about that. And again, these are symptoms, but somehow get to the heart of the matter. When we don't know what our political parties are doing anymore, and the Democrats are no longer the party of the working class, but into kind of, value signaling, identity politics, the Republicans are lying. And in this chaos, all of a sudden we have homeless people everywhere that didn't used to be there. And then we have these kind of what are supposed to be 100-year storms that are happening once a month or more, literally with the weather, by the way, but also in this case of the mass shootings and so on. In your lifetime as a journalist and a close observer of American life, how does this unraveling fit in with the bigger picture? Because you have to believe there's a pattern here, not a conspiracy, but a pattern. When random isolated events start happening all the time, they're not random isolated events anymore. This is who we are. We shoot children. We have homeless people living in tents. We have a Republican Party that's trading place with the Democrats, and vice versa, in sort of a weird way. The working class is under or unrepresented. And I'm just wondering where these flashpoints, these lightning strikes, what they illuminate about a larger picture and a direction. Again, I'm fishing not maybe for a prediction of the future, but how do you see that? How does this all tie together?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's so many threads with the Republican Party is feasting on the anger and rage of the working class. Uh, 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 the Democrats, the line is the economy is doing great, but if you're in Ohio, in Youngstown, there's two Americas. Uh, there's the America that's been in a Great Depression since pretty much the 80s.
Yeah.
The Flint, Michigans, the Youngstown, Ohio's, parts of Appalachia, place like Welch, West Virginia, where I've gone many times. Yeah. These are very poor places. There's two Americas, and I've been hoping. What my hope for the future is, the Democratic Party stops being the pansy-crats. They're pansies. Franklin Roosevelt welcomed the hatred of the rich in one of his speeches.
Yeah,
bring it on, he said, basically, baby. I want more of that, not this waffling. Should we mention, there's a story in today's New York Times, should we mention Trump's felonies? This should be the front and center. Abortion should be front and center. These issues should be front and center.
Yeah.
Grow some hair on your back, is what I'm saying for Democrats.
Yeah.
That's the only hope. Republicans are going to have to self-immolate. If Trump gets elected, the economy, everything, this thing that you mentioned earlier about elites, the Trump people are elites too, moneyed elites who speak the language of we're there for you, the working class person, and they just screw them over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
So it's up to some Democrats coming forward who actually break from the coronation of Hillary Clinton, the coronation of Joe Biden. This is insane, these last few elections. And have somebody, I was a Bernie guy. Now, my East Coast friends will argue with me. Bernie 101 in 2016, we had done a hell of a lot better than Hillary.
Yeah.
Places like Ohio, again, a lot of people I interviewed in Youngstown in 2016 were on the fence, Trump or Bernie.
Sure,
the parabola of anger. So you either get somebody who's progressive angry or conservative angry. So
Hmm.
let's hope we get Bernie. Love him, love Bernie, but he's kind of old. I want younger Bernies,
Yeah,
more of them.
let me reintroduce you. We're kind of, I mean, this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. I am Frank Schaeffer. My guest is Pulitzer Prize-winning author Dale Maharidge.
You got it.
Okay. And Dale Maharidge won a Pulitzer Prize. And also, there are two Bruce Springsteen songs inspired by his books, and he met Bruce. So, cool story. Dale is a professor at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and the author of Pulitzer Prize-winning and Their Children After Them, and 14 other books. And among them is Journey to Nowhere, a saga of the underclass, which inspired the Bruce Springsteen to write a song, Youngstown. And his new book is American Doom Loop, Dispatches from a Troubled Nation, 1980s to 2020s. That's what we're talking about. And by the way, I'd just like to mention, we would like to make American Doom Loop our offering for It Has to Be Read, which is our book club here that we do. And it would be offered in October. I have a commentary I regularly do on Substack and Facebook and all those places called It Has to Be Said. And It Has to Be Read is our book club that we like to offer a book and re-promote it. And I really like this book, and I think it's so important. So we would like to offer that if it's okay with you.
I would love that. Oh my gosh! And if you want to have me help in any way,
Yeah, we'll have you back, and we'll have you on a panel with someone too, or by yourself again. Ernie is the producer and works all this out, but it means we get another bite at the apple talking to you. But in addition to which, if you want someone for us to talk to with you, that would be great. And I have a question. Yeah, Ernie, he just texted me and says, we'll call the boss. Hey, we had Moby, so, why not? But in all seriousness, you're connected to a lot of people. It could be a 23-year-old student or another famous friend of yours. But if you ever think of somebody we ought to be talking to, given our interests, please let Ernie, our producer, know, and we'll book them in a heartbeat on your recommendation. Anybody that needs to be discovered is already famous or needs to be more famous or heard from or has a point of view. So please do that. So let me get back to your book here. I want to go to another bit and talk about this. You're talking about the kind of this doom loop. To illustrate this fact, I purchased both solid and hollow point bullets and drove into the Sierra foothills with a 357 Magnum, and I shot bars of ivory soap with both. Those soap bars were on the front page. The solid bullets made a tiny hole in the soap. Upon exiting, the hollow point ones blew out the backside, nearly cutting the soap bar in two. That's part of a story that you were talking about with the Sacramento County Sheriff, spokesman, et cetera, et cetera. But it just interests me what you have done as a journalist to make these stories live. You kind of go the extra mile. And of course, the sad thing is those hollow points are available, and they're exactly what all kinds of people use in school shootings and all sorts of other horrible things. In addition to being in a doom loop, it just seems that civilizationally, I don't want to sound like I'm crazy here and talk about the decline of the Roman Empire, but it just seems to me that it's a death of 1,000 cuts. You take any individual pathology, we could do this. If it's just school shootings, when I say just, you understand what I'm saying. And then you add in Donald Trump, and then you add in Heritage Foundation, grooming people like Amy Coney Barrett to take away women's rights. Then you add in the Democratic Party becoming all about identity politics and sort of value signaling and lingo instead of substance, and they break their faith with the working class. And then you add in the religious crazy right taking over the Republican Party. But then it's not just that, it's Pentecostal, including Hispanic Christians. So even within evangelical circles, these are the crazies. And now they're in charge, people like Paula White. You have an East Coast press that is ignoring not just the heartland and the working class, but never sees the evangelicals coming because, hey, those aren't our people. We don't pay attention to them. Back in the day, just something that'll interest you as a reporter, my dad's book, A Christian Manifesto, published in I think 1983, 84, something in there, called for the overthrow of the US government if the Roe v. Wade was not reversed, that it was like fighting Hitler's Germany, and he was the public intellectual for millions of evangelicals, literally millions. It outsold probably everything that had been on the New York Times bestseller list for a year. But, why would they review or pay attention to a book like that, even though a whole movement was forming around it? They'd never heard of any of these people. They never knew anybody like it. And I think a lot of our predicament in terms of where we're at and what you're talking about is what you were saying before, the kind of insular, blinkered attitude of the white upper-class American educated elite. And you've spent, you didn't grow up there, but you teach at Columbia, you're bi-coastal, this is where you do things. You're editors at all these top publishing companies that bring your books out, or the people who nominated you for a Pulitzer Prize. It must be odd for you to have grown up in one background and at the same time live in another one that you're also a critic of, because you recognize they're ignoring the things that matter. That's a long, rambling, crazy statement, but there's something in there for you to talk about.
I think, my thing is, I don't know where I belong, because I've always called myself the hound dog in the house of poodles when I've taught at places like Stanford and Columbia. There's only a few working class people in my department.
Mm-hmm.
The rest people are, have a more, and nothing wrong with them. I'm not, they're good people. It's not like
Right.
but I'm not really them. And when I go back to Ohio now, I'm not them either. So I guess I like to think of myself as the ultimate outsider, which is the role of the artist and the journalist.
Yeah.
If you're gonna have any impact, you cannot be an inside player.
Yeah.
I don't want to be friends with anybody in power.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I have a. You'll see in my work. You'll see I have opinions. I talk to, but I talk to everybody. I don't want to be an activist out there with a sign in my hand.
Yeah.
My role is to listen. And in my books, I have listened. I talk to people on the right, and it's funny. 80% of the stuff we agree on often.
Talk about that. What are some of the things you'd be agreeing on when you talk to people on the right, and describe what kind of people they are? Are they famous right wingers or anybody?
Well, after 9/11, I did a book called Homeland, which I would have called something different now, because it was the first thing called Homeland. Now everything's called Homeland.
Yeah.
But I went out into the middle of America to document the rage and anger. And in Chicago, there were two groups. At the time, they were the big right-wing groups, the National Alliance and the World Church of the Creator. And I talked to the leaders in both. The one of them had been indicted in a gun battle charge. These were serious players. And the World Church of the Creator guy was a young guy. And email was pretty new then. I emailed him. I said, look, you're going to say I'm a liberal, but I want to hear what you have to say. So we met in this very busy restaurant called the Phoenix in Chicago. And he said, yeah, I checked out your work. He said, we agree on more than you think. He says, I'm a socialist, and I don't mean national socialist. He says, I'm an environmentalist. We just don't agree about race. So we talked for the next hour and a half, and he very much into economic issues, very much into wanting the environment to be, we were already talking about climate change in those days. It was amazing.
Sure.
And so at the end of the day, it was race. Came down to that. Well, his name, Eric was his name. I'm sorry, not Eric, John. John, some years later, renounced his racist beliefs. So people are changeable.
Yes.
But the lesson in that is when I listened to him, that hour and a half, you take race out of the equation, we agreed on everything. It's kind of scary. And I had flack from the left. How dare you talk to those people? And that's the problem. We're not listening to each other.
Yeah.
So anyway, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. My job description is listening. I have opinions, but it doesn't mean I don't want to hear you if I don't agree with you.
Yeah, we've run into a little bit of the same thing, that we got some comments from liberals, quote unquote, weird idea of liberalism, saying, well, you talk to the former editor of the Wall Street Journal, they're the enemy. Why would you interview him? And it's like, are you kidding me? I'll talk to anybody, besides which, hello, even if you regard someone as your enemy, don't you want to know about them? I mean, that's how you lose wars. If you don't know who your quote enemy is, and I didn't regard him as the enemy. He was very intelligent. Jerry is a UK. He used to be editor of the Financial Times in London, and this is an erudite, educated person who makes a lot of good points. And we've done that. Jerry Baker, and we've done that consistently. So speaking of identity politics, to go to another step here, this idea that somehow you only ever want to hear people who agree with you, and you're supposed to be doing a podcast that talks to authors with various opinions. And yet there's a lot of people who I know who somehow are offended that you would talk to people like this. And this is so very different than what I grew up believing and thinking and still do. One of the few things I brought with me from my days in my dad's evangelical ministry, was that my parents had an open home and anybody could come in and stay. And of course, they wanted to convince them of the truth of their biblical views and so forth. But, the reason his work has lasted is he tried to reach out to other people. And so I remember listening to really interesting discussions with people who my dad was disagreeing with, but politely and articulately. And his own thinking changed over the years because of their influence on all sorts of points of view. So is that an age thing? I mean, when you talk to younger students, because you're a professor too, so take your journalist hat off for a minute, talk to me about your students. Over the years, has the student body changed? I am not fishing for anything. I just would like to hear, a little dispatch from the front here. Is there a difference in the way 18 to 19 to 25-year-olds are processing information now? Are they living in little information bubbles the way everybody else is? Are they looking for other points of view? Are they open? How do you feel?
It's like everything, you can't typecast any group. In general, younger people are into identity politics and so forth, but I still get a lot. I had a class this last spring of students who are basically younger versions of what I was at their age.
Yeah.
I mean, they're me at their age. They want to go do this kind of journalism. They want to do work that illuminates. They want to be fair, but they want to change the world. I've been teaching now for 32 years.
Mm.
This iteration of my life, and that hasn't changed in a
Yeah.
certain group. You talk about a mission when we started talking. I always like to say I'm the evangelical wing of the journalism school in
Yeah.
terms of this kind of work.
Reaching out.
I teach a course called Narrative Long Form Journalism, where I basically push the young people to do the kind of work that I do. Go out and listen, in bed with communities.
Mm.
Like I lived in an Iowa town for a year for one of my books. The 8,000 people. I wanted to know small town America.
Mm.
That kind of fundamental work. They still want to do that. And that's our job description as journalists, as thinkers, is to go in and show people worlds they don't know about. That's what I try to do in my books. That people don't always want to accept it. I'm not a best-selling author, but in my own little way, I've had, the Bruce Springsteen example is one example. That book,
It's a good one. Yeah.
That book didn't sell 10,000 copies, but
Right.
that song Youngstown has been heard by millions.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
have
Good point.
we have influence, and so that's what I mean about evangelical, about journalism. Get the word out there about what we need to know to move forward as a society.
Do you find that the younger people you're talking to who are into identity politics are getting a bum rap? Because I think, you have old school liberals, the New York Times and other places basically beginning to kind of out the woke kids as this and that and the other. I'm always suspicious of that because, again, at 72, I've seen all kinds of new generations come along, and everybody who's a bit older thinks they're going to fail and fuck everything up. People don't. We kind of survive in the same way that I think we, in spite of our environmental catastrophes, I'm glad people are still having children and raising families, because if you went back to the Black Death in 12th, 13th century Europe and half the population was died, that wouldn't be a very good time to get anything going either. Welcome to the human race. fits and starts, one, two steps forward, one step back. That's just the way it rolls. So I'm not particularly perplexed. This too shall pass. Even if the oceans are 30 feet higher, we'll figure it out. The planet might not, but we will. But I don't know how to assess. I'm not a professor teaching a journalism class that, again, would be self-selected for curious individuals. So it's maybe not a good cross-section, but how do you see, Twingy or Twingy or whatever her name is, writes this book on generations, and I've read that, and we're going to try to get her as a guest sometime. But she does these statistical studies of dating and relationships and points of view and dating apps and whether they reach out and have numbers of friendships, all these kind of different things and pathologies. And I just wondered, you have your ear to the ground, you're teaching a class, you're dealing with young people day in, day out. How do you assess that? Not just your class, but, taking the step back, where are we at in terms of next generations picking up where we left off?
Well, this goes back to my point about I have more hope in the very young generation, in that my generation, at this point, I don't want anybody in my age group in power anymore. I mean,
I hear you. Me too.
Let's get rid of, love us all, but let's not be the people in power. I want younger people taking over.
Yeah,
but the really young people, one thing I've noticed, and I thought about this since you asked the question earlier, is socialism is not a bad word among 22 and 23-year-olds. They don't see that as being anything. They want it. They want that European style socialism. They're not going to be able to buy houses. They know it. I just had a conversation with a former student yesterday. He's working on a book now. He just had a child. He's trying to establish himself, and he says, "How do I buy a house? I'll never buy a house."
Yeah.
So they realize they've been screwed, and so of all that I've seen, despite the identity politics, they're angry in a good way. Like and climate change is number one issue among early 20s. Look, if climate change trumps everything, we don't fix that, we won't be here. So every other issue doesn't matter.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
they get
It's a
those
moot
things.
point. It becomes a moot point.
Yeah. Because, the Earth will be here in a million years. We won't. The Earth will heal itself. We'll be gone. So they see the climate change. They see economic issues in a way that students did not see them 25, 30 years ago. So I have hope in the very, very young right now. Get rid of us. Let them take over.
Yeah, I sort of share your view on that. You talk about the fact that the reality is that you feel alien among them and they among you if they visit where you live with your, quote, liberal friends who revile them on social media. The liberal lizards with tails are called pedophiles by the far right. This dehumanization reminds one of wartime. In order to kill or harm another person, the enemy must be made less than human. In World War I, Germans were Huns. In cartoons, World War II, the Japanese buck-toothed monkeys. In modern times, QAnon and other right-wing groups have taken a cue from Putin's Russia, which I mentioned earlier, and you have in your book, where opponents are often set up on false charges of pedophilia with incriminating evidence planted on them. In America, far right has invented a child sex slave dungeon beneath Washington, D.C. pizza joint that is mystically frequented by famous Democrats, left-wing opponents who are groomers, save the children, a mantra. Hollywood elites harvest migrant children at the border for their sexual pleasures. The message, these things make violence against Democrats, liberals, and other perceived enemies acceptable. It's open season on, quote, pedophiles. The big city coastals don't get off easy, especially those in Congress. When factories, steel mills, and mines began closing by the score in the early 1980s, throwing hundreds of thousands of well-paid jobs, there were some lame restraining programs funded by Congress. They failed. The Democratic Party dumped the working class and embraced the neoliberal free market. The party partook in negative feedback loop of dissent by embracing the ideas of Republican libertarian economists, etc. It's interesting just reading that passage from your book again, so sweeping and good, how you are brave enough to talk about how we dehumanize people. You use the World War II, World War I as examples. And then all of a sudden, all Democrats who disagree with Republicans are portrayed as these kind of demonic entities into abuse. A friend of mine, Laura, who's a movie producer and one of the founders of MoveOn.org, was at the conference in Washington this year where Trump spoke to evangelicals, CPAC. And she was saying that all the speakers were no longer talking about Democrats as political opponents, but as demonic forces, that this was a spiritual battle. So it's beyond just their buck-toothed Japanese on a war poster. These people, we are now fighting evil. They're not wrong. They are satanic. I don't know if everybody outside of those circles, I have my ear to the ground because I'm a former evangelical, understands that once you've labeled your opponent as demonic, you're sort of half a breath from witch trials in Salem. I mean, we are really messing with high-powered, high-voltage stuff here. You talk about this in your writing, so I'd just like to discuss that a little bit.
Well, you predicting the future, the very short-term future. This year is not going to end well, is the understatement. We're basically in a proxy war with Russia. What's going on in Gaza and the Middle East right now is mind-numbing. China, all this stuff. But here, if Trump wins, we're screwed. If Trump loses, we're screwed. Because I fear what's going to happen when he loses. If he loses, I'm being optimistic here. When he loses, fingers crossed. I won't put money on that. But if he loses, the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, my feeling is they're not going to do a frontal assault. We're going to see terror actions. And as you note, when you're on a spiritual mission for crusade with God, a Bible in your arm, you will do all kinds of crazy things.
Yeah.
And how will these people be treated? Look how the Weather Underground, the left was gone after in the 60s, or just Freddie Hampton, the Black Panthers, how he was killed in Chicago. Compare that to the Malheur Refuge where the Bundys took over.
Sure.
Weeks. If the Bundys were black, they'd have been dead within the first week.
Well, and if the Capitol had been stormed by a black mob, imagine. I mean, the machine guns would have been out.
There've been dozens dead.
Yeah.
And so if the evangelical right starts a crusade this fall, if Trump loses, we're going to live with some really nasty stuff. I read there's several books out now I want to read about, Civil War. They talk about Civil War.
Sure.
Yeah, that was not a very pretty scene. A lot of people died. Anyway, there's a lot of casual talk about Civil War on that side of the fence, and it's terrifying. So I think some really nasty things are going to happen this fall, either way. And again, how we deal with them, I just hope they're not treated like with the kid gloves that they've been treated with.
Well, what about that kid who shoots two people and then all of a sudden he's on Fox News and a Tucker Carlson hero and he's speaking at CPAC?
Right. Well, is this the guy who was just pardoned in Texas, or this the other guy?
I don't know. We'll ask.
We need a scorecard for all.
My producer texts me stuff, and if he can know who we're talking about, no. But there was a guy pardoned in Texas, and then of course Trump says he's going to pardon everybody who was jailed for the January riots and storming they're now political prisoners. So you're right in terms of the kid glove approach. If he's in power, it'll be open season. Anybody wants to go shoot somebody is going to be a patriot because they're standing up. I mean, he already said that shoplifters should be shot as they come out of a store. And the scene is set for all sorts of violence and by his rhetoric and this kid glove approach to anybody that picks up a gun and kills someone who's demonic on the other side, et cetera. So, and Ernie was texting something just saying, it's not a moral equivalency because the left, has betrayed the working class, no question, white elites, et cetera. And the whole woke element comes off as batshit crazy sometimes and gives excuses to Republicans to do things. That said, there's no moral equivalence here. You know, say somebody who wants to be called they, them is not instigating, you know, mass shootings if they lose a chunk of the election. There is not a moral equivalence there. The left has its problems, but these people are violent and dangerous and anarchic and out of control. And they have demonized and characterized the rest of us as satanic perverts because we're not voting the way they want. And if they win, they win. And if they lose, they will still claim they won. We know they did that one time before. So how do you see that fallout happening? What about all the election workers who are terrified even to count the vote? And, you know, they're calling for patrolling polling stations and so on. I think we've got ourselves a mess on our hands.
We need more people. Like there's a district attorney in Grand Junction, Colorado, who went after that woman. I forget his first name. His name is Rubenstein.
Yeah.
He went after her. He's a Republican and staunch Republican. But
Yeah.
she's the one who gave the voting machines to the right wingers. He
Yeah.
prosecuted her. We need more Republicans like that.
Yes.
Who stand up. I'm hoping there's also some moral backbone among the Republicans I grew up with. I kind of like. I mean, we
Yes.
disagree. I grew up with Republicans. I don't have a problem with them, and a lot of it's over financial, issues, whatever. We can argue about that, but they weren't crazy, and a lot of Republicans today are not crazy. I
Right.
want them to come forward and take ownership of that party. We need for all of its flaws, we have a two-party system. Well, right now we've got a one-party system.
How do you see the Supreme Court playing into this? Because it's so clearly weighted in favor of not just the Republicans, but the extremist of Republicans. And you see this every time they rule in favor of religious civil liberties while taking away someone else's civil liberties in the name of religious liberties. You know, we know where they'll go on these things. You know, how far would you think the Republican-dominated Supreme Court will go in winking and nodding and going along with and empowering these radical crazies of the Republican Party?
It terrifies me. We've seen, we've already started seeing hints of that, uh, uh, but I know we're getting near the end here, is we need the Democrats, as I just sum up, to be more forceful in terms of, this is a moral crusade.
Yeah.
This is I don't mean that in religious terms.
No, I understand.
We have to hold these people accountable. And anyway, I don't know how to answer that question. My crystal ball is so foggy and so many things. I'm just worried about the immediate future.
Yeah. Let me just wind this up by saying again that it's wonderful to have you. We're going to have your book as a selection to our book club. It has to be read. And we will be doing that, I think, in October. So the book is American Doom Loop, good title, Dispatches from a Troubled Nation, 1980s to 2020s. And it's by someone who's actually lived those years, written about them, as a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, teaches journalism and has for the last 30 years, isn't theorizing about, quote, the young people, but stands up in classrooms every day and does this and writes about these issues, inspired a Bruce Springsteen song, and has done a lot of interesting things. So, Dale, it's been great having you here. I really appreciate it. And you're a good reminder to people that there are actual, real, live, kicking, voting liberals out there who are not all about intolerance and shutting down other voices, because you talk to other people. You describe yourself as a kind of an old-fashioned liberal, I guess. Is that a good way to put it?
Yes, of the Great Depression era kind of liberal.
Yeah. Well, hey, you talk about wanting a new generation put in charge and get rid of the old guys like us, but they still need to hear from that generation, because you can remind us where we come from, I think. And that must serve a purpose. You must, while you're talking to your students, have some of them that are really intrigued about your personal history and the kind of breadth of lived experience you bring, because of course the deficit of being young is that you don't have that lived experience. Do they draw upon that in your classes?
I hope so. I think they do, but they're all pretty much self-starting. They're all pretty much uh, 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 I don't want to say mini me's because that sounds so arrogant, but I
Sure.
see myself in them from when I was their age. So there's my hope is in for journalism at least is in these young people I'm seeing.
Excellent. Well, hey, everyone get the book. We'll link to it, and you can tell Ernie when I click off here, stay on, so you can talk with him a little bit about the book club aspect and also what you would like posted when we put this anywhere so that we're promoting however you want to be promoted or have people get in touch with you. And again, remember, if you know of someone who is working in any field that you think we should be talking to, please help us out and tell Ernie that this would be a good person for us to book.
Oh, I know some folks. I'll be talking about that.
Good. Well, Dale, this has been a real pleasure and genuinely an honor to talk to you. Thank you so
Thank,
much for taking the time with us.
thank you for the wonderful interview. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.